The cell was 6 feet by 8 feet. Stone walls, iron bars, a single window no bigger than a book. This was Vikram's world now. He had been a teacher once, loved by students, respected in his village. Then came the false accusation, the rushed trial, the guilty verdict for a crime he did not commit. Now, at 28 years old, he sat on a hard cot and stared at walls that would hold him for the next 14 years. The first month was agony. He complained constantly, to himself, to the guards, to the other prisoners. "This is unfair. I don't belong here. Why me?" The other prisoners nodded. They understood. They complained too, about the food, about the guards, about the cold, about the heat, about everything. Complaining was the only thing that filled the endless silence. But one morning, something shifted. Vikram woke early, before dawn. The cell was completely dark. He sat on his cot, preparing for another day of misery. Then it happened. A single ray of sunlight found its way through the tiny window. It was thin, no wider than his finger, but it was warm. It landed on the opposite wall, a small golden circle in a world of gray. Vikram stared at it. For the first time in months, he forgot to complain. He just watched. The ray moved slowly across the wall as the sun rose. It was there for maybe 20 minutes. Then it was gone. But something stayed. That night, Vikram couldn't sleep. Not because of misery, but because of a strange new thought. If that tiny light can find its way into this dark cell, what else have I been missing? The next morning, he woke before dawn again. He waited, and when the ray appeared, he smiled, the first smile in months. Vikram began a new practice. Each day, he would find one thing to be grateful for: the ray of light, the fact that he could still see it, the memory of his students' faces, the roof over his head when it rained, the kindness of one guard who sometimes brought extra bread. The other prisoners noticed the change. "Vikram, why are you smiling? You're in prison." "I know," he said, "but I'm also alive. I can still breathe, I can still think, I can still hope." They thought he had lost his mind, but something strange happened. As Vikram continued his gratitude practice, the cell began to feel different. Not physically, it was still cold and gray, but inside him, space was opening. The walls weren't closing in anymore. The time wasn't crushing him. He started sharing his practice. What if instead of complaining about the food, we were grateful to have food at all? Some prisoners laughed, some listened, a few tried it. Slowly, the cell block began to change. Not the walls, the people. Years passed. Vikram became known as the grateful prisoner. New inmates would arrive, full of anger and complaint, and the older ones would point to him. "Watch that one," they'd say. "He'll teach you something." Vikram would approach the new prisoner and ask, "What are you grateful for today?" The prisoner would stare at him like he was crazy. "Grateful? I'm in prison." "So am I," Vikram would smile, "but I'm also breathing, and as long as I'm breathing, there's something to be grateful for." When Vikram's 14 years ended, something remarkable happened. The prisoners, hardened men who never showed emotion, lined up to hug him goodbye. The guard who had brought extra bread for years shook his hand. "Vikram," he said quietly, "you were the only prisoner I ever met who made prison feel less like prison." Vikram walked out into the sun. He was 52 years old, his hair was gray, his body was worn, but his eyes held a light that 14 years of darkness could not touch. A reporter heard his story and came to interview him. "Sir, you spent 14 years in prison for a crime you did not commit. How did you survive?" Vikram smiled, the same smile that started with a ray of sunlight decades ago. "I didn't just survive, I lived." The reporter was confused. "But you were in prison." Vikram nodded. "The walls were in prison, I was not." He leaned forward, eyes bright. "Prison is a place, suffering is a choice. I learned that when you complain, you give your power away. You say, 'My happiness depends on circumstances changing,' but when you practice gratitude, you take your power back. You say, "My happiness depends on me, right here, right now." The reporter wrote furiously. "That ray of sunlight," Vikram continued, "it didn't change my cell, it changed me. And when I changed, my whole world changed, even though the walls stayed the same." Vikram's story teaches us the most important truth about human freedom. You can be in prison and be free. You can be free and be in prison. It depends entirely on where you place your attention. Complaining chains you to what's wrong. Gratitude connects you to what's right. And no matter how dark your circumstances, there is always something to be grateful for. A breath, a memory, a ray of light. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control what you focus on, and what you focus on grows. Stop complaining about the walls. Start looking for the light. If Vikram's story inspired you to shift from complaining to gratitude, subscribe to Life Lessons Daily for more stories about finding light in dark places. Click the bell for daily reminders that your attention is your most powerful tool. In the comments, share what's one thing you're grateful for right now, even if everything else feels hard. Your gratitude might inspire someone else to look for their own ray of light.